The Browning High Power is what can be called the first Wonder 9 pistol and was ahead of its time. This is not a video of the storied service history of the Browning High Power, as books have been written on this topic, and if you want to get some more history on the piece, you will find plenty of it with a little bit of searching around. If one were to consider the High Power in the 1930s, it was truly a pistol that you may have wanted, as it was probably the best thing out there. Some would argue that the High Power even made the 1911 obsolete, and while that may be a bold statement, it's pretty much true if we take stock gun against stock gun at that point in history. But the 1911 was modernized for 50 or so years, starting with the US government sold them as surplus in the 1950s for 20 bucks. People at the time started messing with them and never really stopped. The High Power, on the other hand, was a weird foreign pistol that shot that wimpy 9mm and was not as cheap and available to mess around with for the last couple of generations of people in the USA. Instead, it just continued to soldier on in the hands of servicemen from around the world, putting down terrorists in Northern Ireland to Israel, and carried in officers' holsters from Australia to Sudan and everywhere in between. That meant from the 50s to the early 80s, if you needed a gun that held a lot of bullets, you wanted a High Power, and you had to buy one at full price. This limited its buyers in the USA, and it never caught on like the 1911. One is reminded here of the film Serpico, where Al Pacino is seen buying a High Power at the John Giovinazzo Company gun shop. That takes a 14-shot clip. You expecting an army? The store clerk says, holding a High Power up as Pacino fills out forms. No, just a division, Pacino says without looking up. That film was based on a true story of a cop in New York, at that time a city full of corruption. Serpico later confirmed that this scene was in fact true, and that, in fact, he bought that High Power at the exact gun shop as pictured in the film. Now, this film came out in 1973, before most seeing this were even born. It was considered specialized and niche back in those days. My personal history of this pistol consists of owning and shooting a few of them over the years. Caused me to form a few opinions on the original design that always left me parting ways with ones that I had. One has to face facts. The High Power is approaching 90 years old as a design, and it is a little dated at this point. But it also was never truly modernized for those that would use it today, such as a guy like me. At the time I was in the market for a high-capacity all-metal 9mm, I had a slew of options, such as Berettas, SIGs, and Smith & Wessons, all of which were cheaper and more modern in every way. Two more practical High Powers came in and out of my hands, one being the Arcus 94 and the other being put out under the Charles Daly name. The Arcus featured modern squared-off, stealth bomber-esque looks with finger grooves, and the other, the Charles Daly, being a more modern take with XS big dot sights as standard. The problem with both of these were the Charles Daly shot nowhere near point of aim with the XX sights, which I have never liked, and the Argus build quality was low on my example, and I could never make it run worth a crap the sight. One of my shooting companions several years ago competed in IDPA with a High Power, shooting the living crap out of it and whooping my ass at matches on more than one occasion as I ran much more modern pistols. He was, at that time, a total fan and had made his decision that the single action trigger and the extra weight of the piece more than made up for its European downsides. The downsides of the High Power as a practical piece were, to me at least, three big things: the magazine disconnect safety, the sights, and finally the weird safety lever. Magazine disconnect safety in and of itself is one of those things that is not a deal breaker on a practical pistol in my opinion. The magazine safety is probably more misunderstood and disliked for stupid reasons than anything else that's ever been put on a pistol. This safety feature makes the gun inoperable if the magazine is not in place, regardless of a loaded chamber. Most people who hate them state that they want the gun to fire without a magazine in the event that you are reloading the pistol and still need to fire because, quote, you may need to fire it before you can get the next magazine in place. That's bullshit in my opinion, as I can never find reference to this actually happening in a fight. Reloads are already rare in a fight, and if you have to do it so slowly that you already don't have the mag in your hand before you eject the other one out of the gun, you're doing it wrong. My opinion on this is based on watching people reload under time limits in a training environment under a moderate amount of stress, hundreds, if not thousands, of times. If you wait around to get the next mag in the gun until the empty one hits the ground, you are probably not good enough at gun handling that having that one round available to use mid reload is going to be your biggest problem. Get the next mag in and have it on its way before you eject that empty one. The other reason that most experts cite for not wanting a mag disconnect is, quote, if the magazine becomes lost or damaged, it is better to have a single shot pistol than a non-functional one. I will give you that the magazines fail, and I have heard of and personally witnessed magazines break and the guts and rounds fall to the ground or all over a patrol vehicle. But this is another thing that is easily remedied by having a second mag available. If this happens and you don't have a second mag, then you're probably not going to think to pick up 9mm rounds off the floor and start stuffing them in the chamber. This isn't the 1860s, and you are not at the Battle of Little Bighorn. It didn't work out so well for the 7th Cavalry then, and it's not looking like it's going about equally as hot for you as well. No, the reason I hated the magazine safety on the high power specifically is it is a terrible one. The nature of how the pistol works means that the spring-loaded magazine safety is pushing against the trigger, making the trigger pull just that much heavier or gritty. And it also pushes against the magazine itself, making it not drop free when you try to get it out of the gun. Having a single action pistol is advantageous because it gives you a good, consistent trigger pull. Original vintage European high powers are known for having gritty, heavy triggers with the magazine safety partially to blame. When high capacity 9mm were a rarity, and that was fine. But in the modern market with 4-pound triggered striker fired options that hold 20 rounds everywhere, it's unforgivable. Drop-free mags are also a requirement. When the mag is empty or damaged, I want it to get out of the damn gun and go away by hitting a button. Period. I don't want to have to rip it out so I can get the next one in. The magazine safety in the high power prevents this from happening. It's a relic of a bygone era that was made for a specific military's requirement that Frenchmen wouldn't lose expensive magazines in the field while cleaning out latrines or eating baguettes, and it's contrary to how the pistol is used today. Inevitably, I will get comments that will say that the removal of the bastardized contraption of the magazine disconnect is a relatively simple matter and fixes this issue on a high power. This is totally true, but there is at least one case where this was done and the, quote, removal of a safety device, end quote, from a pistol sounded really bad in court, leading to a plea deal instead of an acquittal. In the case that I am referring to, Masada Ayub in Combat Handguns, February 2006, mentions, quote, a case of this that occurred in Florida. The situation was an accidental discharge from a factory stock Colt Commander 45, which struck a bystander and inflicted a fatal wound. While police and evidence technicians searched the scene, they discovered a Browning 9mm autoloader in the defendant's car. Both weapons were studied in detail by the firearms examiners at the crime lab. They determined the magazine disconnector safety had been removed from the Browning high power. This became an issue as the case progressed towards trial. The high power in question was not even the gun used in the negligent shooting, but it was used against the defendant in court. I am not trying to make the fight any harder on me after the fight is actually over, so I always opted to leave the damn thing in. The next big problem I had with most high powers is the sights. Many of the more traditional high powers and several of the cheaper clone copies had the standard black-on-black post and notch sights that, while not horrible, were not exactly great either. This is to be expected with surplus or retro pistols, and I can give it a pass. The thing is, the more modern FN practical high powers that came out at the end of the production run and were modernized still had weird European sights that were dovetailed into the slide. They were not 3-dot sights exactly, but more like 3 big rectangles. They basically whited out the entire front sight blade and then put really 2 big white rectangles on the rear. These were less than ideal and reminded me of some cigarette-smoking Vespa-riding European trying to design a better set of sights on a gun he's not even allowed to own. Going back to the Charles Daly I purchased several years ago, One of the big draws was the excess big dot sights installed from the factory, and if they would have hit anywhere close to point of aim and produced even a bit of accuracy, I might have kept the damn thing. It just seems like high powers always got the short end of the stick when it came to sighting arrangements, and no one ever bothered to put out a model with a useful set of modern sights on it. Granted, this is easily the most fixable problem of the high power, but remember, this is not a Glock. This is a high power. When you venture into a design that was adopted by multiple nations, made by multiple manufacturers, and set up in multiple different ways, the chances of this becoming a simple DIY project become more and more slim. If you wanted a set of modern sights for your high power, you needed the assistance of a gunsmith or a milling machine and a lot of determination, both of which many gun owners are sorely lacking. The last thing that was always a gripe to me was the safety lever. I would argue that most safety levers in the era that the high power was developed were intended to be switched off, and then a grip of one hand established to fire the pistol like you do in bullseye shooting. This is fine, but no one shoots that way anymore, like at all, except for maybe bullseye shooters who aren't exactly filled with people trying to register for matches. I have been a defensive armed professional and civilian firearms trainer for over a decade and a half at this point, and I have never been trained or taught people to shoot one-handed unless they have a damn good reason to, like the other one is occupied or missing. So a modern thumb safety that lends itself to be held in the off position and then used with a good high thumbs two-handed hold is the preferred setup on a modern pistol that is fitted with a thumb safety. If you take a look at pretty much all of the polymer frame pistols with a thumb safety, you'll find that it's set up like this. This is another thing that the 1911 benefited from over the years, as custom makers and eventually manufacturers adopted this larger safety change. Today, you almost can't get a safety lever on a 1911 that's as little as pokey as the original one was. They're all big, wide, and usable. The high power, for some reason, never had this feature integrated to it for way too long. Short of one-off custom jobs, the stock safety was never really intended for a modern grip. And then, when FN upgraded it, they did it with a weird sort of extended safety lever thing that they put on both sides, so it was tactical. I never was really sure what to do with it, as your thumb was clearly not designed to ride over it while shooting, and I never could get comfortable with it. It also seemed sloppy as far as fitment. I never snicked off properly like modern 1911s. Going back to the almost right Charles Daly, it was the first stock high power that I had seen that had something more akin to a modern practical safety on a factory gun. Like I said before, I just wish the damn thing would have shot better. I probably would have kept it. So for about a decade, I decided the high power was just not the pistol for me. As much as I love history and Serpico is awesome, I just figured high powers and I would never really truly get along. Well, then Springfield goes and makes the SA-35, and it addresses all of the gripes I have with the design while still keeping it retro looking. And they went and started making it in the USA to boot. Man, I had to try one out. I don't know how well the SA-35 is selling, to be honest. It came out about a year ago, and even though I deal in guns, I couldn't get one. Further, I only ever saw one in the wild, and it was used, barely, and the dealer wanted almost full new retail. Car buyers will understand this market. It's nuts, and as far as getting anything nice right now, and you're going to pay for it. A few days back, I finally got a hold of one and managed to hit the range for the first time in months. I was going into this with high hopes, and Springfield met all of them. I get it now. The SA-35 made me change my opinion on the high power as a practical competition and defensive pistol. For the first time, somebody put out a high power that I actually like, and it can be pushed into roles beyond curio and range safe queen. This is the high power that you can shoot the snot out of and actually enjoy it because the feature set is exactly what a modernized high power should have. The first and most important thing is that this high power has no magazine safety. The SA-35 is the first high power or high power copy in nearly 80 years that I have ever known to come factory equipped with no magazine disconnect safety. This means the legal concerns of removing it and the impractical concerns of the design are now null and void. This is huge. Further, Springfield opted to modernize the thumb safety so it's much more modern. It's not hugely extended and it's very subtle in its design, but I had no problem riding the safety lever while shooting the pistol with a modern two-handed high thumbs hold. This is the first time that I've ever been able to hold a high power like I want and actually be able to bang steel with it and get the sights back on target while an empty case is still flying through the air. 3. The sights are much improved. I am not the biggest fan of 3-dot setups and prefer to have the front sight have some high visibility while the rear is blacked out. Springfield in general has gotten away from the 3-dot or other pictograms on the back of the rear sight of their offerings. Most of them come with a front fiber optic, but here they have opted to go with a standard white dot. This is the only swing and a miss design-wise that Springfield did in my opinion. I would have probably paid extra for a tritium fiber optic front sight here, as that's my preference. No big deal, and it's easily fixed, except Springfield chose to go with a one-off dovetail and only sights that are available option at this point that I can confirm are specifically set up for the SA35 are available from XS, the same makers of those lovely big dots I love so much. Luckily, the ones that they are offering are not the previously mentioned XS big dots, so it may be an upgrade that is in the future. Add to this that the grips are form-fitting, checkered walnut with a nice figure to them. The finish is a matte, business-like blue, similar to Parkerizing, and the gun ships in a soft case and comes with a mag. The Metgar mag, that's 15 rounds. Tested the pistol with 235 rounds of ammo on its first range outing, the vast majority of which were the standard 9mm reload that I have come to settle on as works in all the pistols I have used it in. This is an Arms Core 9mm 124 grain FMJ bullet over a relatively stout load of bullseye with a standard small pistol primer. Primers are usually CCI as I find them to always work the best, but the great primer shortage that we have experienced in the 2020s to this point has led me to using what I can find. In this case, it was Fiucci primers, and I noticed no difference and found them to work as advertised here. I also loaded my standard dog lunch mag of 5 Hornady Critical Defense 124 grain, 5 Sig V Crown 124 grain, 5 Winchester Ranger T 124 grain, 147 grain in the mag and ran them all through the gun with no issue. Then I tried a second test with 5 147 grain Remington Golden Sabers and 5 old school Federal Hydra Shocks. Malfunctions only occurred on the Hydra Shocks, which is of a specific type of malfunction, and they were my fault. As far as the pistol feeding hollow points, I see no reason to suggest that it would be an issue here. Obviously, if I pick a load that I plan to carry with this piece, I will do a bit of testing to ensure they run before staking my life on them. Experience about 6 very specific malfunctions that, after analyzing the video evidence, as it turns out there's value to recording your shooting besides making videos that no one watches, were entirely my fault. You see, my very high thumbs forward hold led to my support side thumb interfering with the front end of the slide stop a bit and caused it to prematurely engage because I was pushing on it. This is not the fault of the build quality of the firearm at all. If I were to blame the pistol for this would be like saying that a manual transmission car is no good because I can't get it to engage and drive down the road because I don't know how to drive it. That's a training issue and a user error, not a problem with the product. Another test I do to new guns is what I call the gangster/Top Gun protocol. I shoot the pistol dominant hand and support hand. Then I fire the pistol 5 times each-handed gangsta style to the side. Then I shoot 5 more with the pistol inverted. I ran them all. I have had lesser guns that can't do this test reliably, and that is why I find merit in it. If you have to hold the pistol in a certain way to make it work, then that's a factor for me. There are 2 main competitors for the SA35 in the current 2023 market that I feel are truly more apples to apples as far as a fair comparison. The first is the Turkish imported TSAS brand, which is cheaper than the SA35 and is available as an upgraded, more tactical model. The problem with this is the damn magazine safety is present in it, and that completely eliminates this as a contender for me. The other is the new FN high power that was released at SHOT Show this year by FN. This pistol is not a high power. It's a modern pistol that they tried to make look like a high power. It's like calling the Mustang EV a Mustang. even though we know that is marketing and it's not really the reality of the situation. People will always look at the new Mustang and go, the EV one, and go, that's not a real Mustang. Just like people are always going to look at the FN and say, yeah, that's not a real high power. So overall, should you buy a Springfield SA35? In today's market, a polymer frame, striker-fired Wonder guns with slide cuts, optic-ready infrared sighting options, and 60 million round reliability records. Well, that largely depends on you. If you like the latest and greatest, the SA35 is probably not the piece for you. However, if you're like me and have a few of the polymer guns that you use, but you want something else with a bit more historical flavor that is made of metal and it's approved enough that you can actually use it, then the SA35 fills the bill better than anything else on the market ever. It is the high power for people who never liked high powers, and it comes highly recommended. And like always, if you like this kind of stuff, I don't care. If you want to subscribe, I don't care, because I don't do any of this for you. I do it for me. Thanks.